My name is Giles Rice, and on the day of my daughter's wedding, I walked up to the grand entrance expecting to see her smiling face. Instead, I saw something that will haunt me forever. My own photograph blown up larger than life with the cruel words beneath it, "No entry." Imagine being told you were no longer welcome at the very moment your only child begins her new life. But what looked like my final humiliation was only the beginning. Hours later, the same daughter who cast me aside would be sobbing, begging me to return after the man she loved was unmasked. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more unforgettable stories. The moment I saw that easel standing by the grand entrance of the Fairmont San Francisco, my chest tightened, as if someone had dropped a stone inside it. My photograph, black and white, professionally printed, framed like a warning poster, stared back at me, and beneath it, in elegant calligraphy, the words, "Entry forbidden," by request of the bride and groom. My daughter Ava had chosen to make my exile public. It wasn't just rejection, it was a calculated humiliation. I froze on the marble steps as guests flowed past me, some recognizing my face and whispering. The Cartier box, with her wedding gift, slipped in my hand, the diamonds inside as cold as my veins. I had imagined this day so differently. I thought I would stand proudly, perhaps fumbling my steps, as I walked Ava down the aisle, like I once did at her graduation. Instead, I stood outside, cast as the villain in my own daughter's story. A security guard approached me, his voice polite but firm. "Sir, I'm sorry, you're not expected here." His hand rested lightly on my elbow, and for a brief second I thought of resisting. But what would it accomplish? The humiliation was already complete. As I turned away, something in me hardened. Anger, yes, but deeper than that, resolve. This wasn't about me being an outdated father clinging to control. This was about Harold, the man who had wrapped his claws around my daughter so tightly that she believed I was the enemy. I knew what I had discovered about him. The court cases, the lies, the other women, all carefully documented, filed away in folders sitting in my hotel room. Ava might not believe me now, but truth has a way of clawing itself into the light when the pressure mounts. I placed the Cartier box gently at the foot of that easel, right beneath my own face. Let her open it when the dust settled, when Harold's mask had finally slipped, when she realized who had really been standing by her side all along. The guard called me a taxi, and as I stepped inside, I caught one last glimpse of my own eyes staring back at me from that photograph. The man in that picture still hoped for reconciliation, but the man in the cab knew better. As the taxi wound through San Francisco's streets, my humiliation began to transform into strategy. I thought of the $50,000 check I had written weeks earlier, now resting in Harold's wallet like a loaded gun pointed at my own daughter's future. But a gun can be disarmed if you know where the trigger is. I pulled my wallet from my suit jacket thumb, brushing across the duplicate check stub. Harold thought he had me cornered, that his charm had bought him my silence. But he had overlooked one simple fact: I had signed the check, and I could stop it just as easily. That was the moment the shame turned into something else entirely. Not fury, not despair, clarity. If Harold wanted to humiliate me publicly, then I would return the favor in the one arena he valued most: money. And I would do it quietly, without shouting, without accusations. Sometimes the strongest strike is the one your enemy never sees until the floor collapses beneath him. 13 weeks earlier, I had first met Harold, if you could call it meeting. It was through a glowing video screen, my daughter's voice bubbling with excitement as she announced her engagement. "Dad, I have incredible news," Ava said, her eyes shining. She thrust her left hand toward the camera, the diamond catching every bit of light in her expensive San Francisco apartment. And then he appeared. Harold Kensington. Tall, polished, with a jawline fit for a magazine cover and a smile too perfect to be real. "Mr. Rice," he said, voice smooth as glass, "I promise your daughter will be the happiest woman in the world." The way he placed his hand on Ava's shoulder made me uneasy. It wasn't tender, it was possessive. He talked about cryptocurrency, about blockchain, about diversifying portfolios across renewable energy and tech, the kind of language meant to impress. But what struck me wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't. His eyes never stayed on me. They darted to something off-screen. And his smile, it tightened every time I asked a question, as though real conversation was an inconvenience. I told myself it was just a father's protectiveness, but Margaret, my late wife, used to say, "Trust your gut, Giles. Charm without substance is a mask." As Harold droned on, twisting a gold ring on his pinky finger, that mask seemed ready to crack. 2 weeks later, Harold asked for a private meeting. I agreed, hoping to better understand the man who wanted to marry my daughter. We met at a cafe on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where marble tables were meant to whisper wealth. Harold stood to shake my hand, grip firm but damp, and motioned me to sit. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, rotating it 90 degrees exactly. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Mr. Rice, can I trust you with something confidential?" My instincts told me to walk away, but my daughter's future held me in that chair. He spoke of frozen assets, regulatory reviews, and a temporary inability to access his millions. "Eva dreams of a fairy tale wedding," he said, rehearsed sadness in his tone. "I can't bear to disappoint her." Then came the ask, $50,000. $50,000. A significant piece of my retirement savings. He produced documents, portfolio summaries stamped with official seals, legal jargon too dense to absorb in one sitting. They looked legitimate, but the way he revealed them felt like a magician pulling a card from his sleeve. Too smooth, too prepared. "I'll pay you back by year's end," he promised. "With interest." My pen trembled as I signed the check. His eyes followed every stroke as if his future depended on it. Maybe it did. When I tore it free, Harold's relief washed over his face so fast it nearly betrayed him. He folded the check into his wallet like a man pocketing treasure. As he left, I sat alone with my cold coffee, hearing Margaret's voice in my mind. Truth is more important than comfort. For the first time in decades, I felt I had betrayed both truth and comfort for the illusion of protecting my daughter. The night after I handed Harold that check, I couldn't sleep. My Brooklyn apartment felt like a tomb, each room echoing with Margaret's absence. Her photograph sat on the nightstand, her gentle smile frozen in time. I picked it up, tracing the glass with my thumb, whispering the words she had repeated so often. Truth is more important than comfort. If she had been alive, she would never have trusted Harold. She would have seen through that polished charm, the carefully rehearsed vulnerability. But I had given him the money anyway against every instinct. I opened the leather-bound journal Margaret had given me years earlier, its pages mostly blank. That night I wrote February 9th, 2025. Gave Harold Kensington $50,000 for wedding expenses. Ava doesn't know. Something feels wrong, but I made a promise. My hand shook as I signed my initials beneath the entry, as if I needed proof later that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Ava called, her voice bubbling with excitement, as she rattled off details of flowers, photographers, and music Harold had arranged. "He's thought of everything, Dad," she said, her tone carrying the kind of admiration a father wishes to hear directed at himself. I tried to respond with enthusiasm, but every word caught in my throat. She spoke of Harold as though he were her savior, never noticing how much control he exerted. Every decision was his every arrangement filtered through him. Eva had become a spectator in her own wedding. When I asked gently if she was sure about rushing things, she bristled. 6 months is plenty, Dad. You and Mom didn't date for long before marrying, remember? The way she used her mother's memory as a shield cut deeper than she knew. Margaret had been my partner, my anchor, not a manipulator in a designer suit. 2 weeks later, Harold invited us both to dinner at Le Bernardin in San Francisco. It was supposed to be a chance for me to know him better, perhaps even repair what I feared was already broken between Ava and me. The restaurant gleamed with crystal chandeliers and linen so white it seemed untouchable. Ava swept across the room in a green dress that sparkled under the lights, her joy lighting every corner of that place. Harold stood to greet me, his handshake lingering a second too long, thumb pressing against my knuckles like a silent message, I'm in control here. He ordered wine without asking my preference, recommended dishes, as if he were the host of my own daughter's life. Mr. Rice, do you still use a checkbook? How authentic, he said, smiling with that same gleam that made my stomach turn. Ava giggled nervously, and I felt like an intruder at my own table. I forced myself to endure the evening listening as he sprinkled financial jargon like confetti, while Ava looked at him with adoring eyes. Every time I tried to steer the conversation towards sincerity, Harold redirected it back to himself. By dessert, I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. Something was wrong with this man. That night, back in my hotel room, I loosened my tie and sat at the small desk, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. The glow from the lamp felt too harsh, almost accusatory, as if Margaret herself were watching me from the frame I carried in my suitcase. I typed Harold's name into the search bar slowly, deliberately, like a man opening a locked door he wasn't sure he wanted to step through. At first, the results seemed harmless. A polished LinkedIn profile, a few mentions on obscure tech blogs, photos of Harold speaking at blockchain events in generic hotel ballrooms. But something about them felt too neat, too curated. I dug deeper, scrolling past page 1, page 2, until I reached the parts of the internet most people never bother to visit. There it was. A business registration filed just 6 months ago, Kensington Digital Ventures, registered to a UPS store in Los Angeles. No office, no staff, just a rented mailbox with a fancy name. My chest tightened. Then came the court filings. Los Angeles County Superior Court, case number CV 20247891, defendant Harold James Kensington, charges misappropriation of funds, identity theft, investment fraud. I read the name of the plaintiff aloud, my voice hollow in the empty room. Rebecca Martinez, $180,000. Her picture stared back at me from a news article, a young woman, bright eyes, a hopeful smile. A smile not so different from Ava's. My stomach churned. Another article. Sarah Chen, $95,000 gone. Jennifer Walsh, $240,000 lost. Always the same pattern. Women in their late 20s or early 30s, each wearing the same dazed expression in their photographs. Some had engagement rings nearly identical to Ava's. My hands trembled as I hit print, each sheet sliding from the business center printer like evidence in a trial. Court documents, news articles, photographs, dozens of them. I built folders for each woman, stacking them into a fortress of truth around me. When I finally stopped, the desk was buried under manila files. Harold's crimes spread before me like a crime scene. At 5 a.m, exhausted, I slumped into the leather chair, staring at the mound of paper. Margaret's voice returned. Truth is more important than comfort. I whispered back, I should have listened sooner. Later that day, Eva called humming with happiness as she described how Harold had chosen the band, and even coordinated the hotel staff. Every detail seemed perfect in her eyes, but to me it only sounded like a man building a cage around her life. My throat tightened as I tried to warn her. "Ava, are you sure you know Harold well enough?" Her tone sharpened. "Of course, Dad. 6 months is enough when you've met the right person. You told me to trust my instincts, remember?" I swallowed the words on the tip of my tongue, the promise I had made Harold not to tell her about the money. The chains of that secret bound me tighter than any set of handcuffs. But my instincts screamed louder with each passing day. Harold wasn't just wrong for her. He was dangerous. By the time the wedding was just weeks away, my suspicion had hardened into something heavier, like a stone I couldn't set down. I walked through my Brooklyn apartment like a ghost, every surface reminding me of Margaret's voice, every silence filled with doubts I couldn't share with my daughter. I dialed Ava's number more than once, my thumb hovering over the call button, but each time I hung up before she could answer. What would I say? That her future husband was a fraud. A man who collected engagement rings the way others collected coins, that her father had already given him $50,000 and couldn't find the courage to admit it. Instead, I wrote letters, dozens of them, some angry, some pleading, most unfinished. They piled up on my desk until I shoved them into a drawer, unable to look at my own weakness anymore. The only thing I could face was Margaret's photograph. Her eyes seemed to say what I already knew. Eventually, truth forces its way to the surface, even if it destroys you in the process. I thought back to the dinner at Le Bernardin, Harold's smugness still burning in my memory. He had ridiculed me in subtle jabs, each remark dressed as humor but intended to belittle. "Mr. Rice, do you still use a checkbook?" How authentic. Ava had laughed nervously, not realizing he was stripping away my dignity with every word. I clenched my fists under the table that night, but I stayed silent. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy, because I knew then, as I know now, that shouting would never beat a man like Harold. The only thing that could was evidence and patience. So I began to prepare. I gathered the folders I had printed, organizing them by victim, by timeline, by financial document. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah Chen, Jennifer Walsh. Their names haunted me like a chorus of warnings. I memorized the details of Harold's scams until they etched themselves into my mind. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was a pattern, a predator hiding behind expensive suits and false promises. Then came Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me when I dialed Ava's number that morning, knowing she would answer full of joy while I was about to shatter her world. I held Rebecca's court filing in my hand. As I spoke, Ava Harold asked me for $50,000. He said his assets were frozen. Her silence cut deeper than any words. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "You're lying. Harold would have told me." I tried again, pressing forward with the truth, but before I could finish, Harold's voice cut in smooth, practiced, dismissive. He twisted my warning into an attack, painting me as a bitter old man who couldn't let go. And my daughter chose him over me. By the end of that call, Eva had screamed words I never thought I'd hear, "Don't come to my wedding." The line went dead, and with it, 28 years of fatherhood seemed to collapse in my chest. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, the folders spread across the table like abandoned weapons. Harold had won for now, but what he didn't know was that I still held one card. He couldn't control the check, and I would decide when to play it. The morning after that phone call, I woke to the gray Brooklyn light seeping through half-closed blinds. My apartment was silent, but my mind raged like a storm. Eva's words still echoed, "Don't come to my wedding." She believed Harold's lies over my truth. That knowledge pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folders stacked in front of me, the evidence I had collected with shaking hands. It was all there: court cases, photographs, testimonies, proof that Harold wasn't a man of wealth, but a predator dressed in designer suits. Yet none of it mattered if Ava refused to see it. By late afternoon, anger had cooled into something sharper. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to plead with my daughter to open her eyes. Instead, I would strike where Harold was weakest. He thrived on illusions, money, power, control. Without them, he was nothing. And I still held the key check number 2847. I left my apartment with Margaret's words burning in my ears. Truth is more important than comfort. At Chase Bank's downtown branch, the fluorescent lights hummed above rows of counters' clerks, moving with the efficiency of people who had seen every kind of betrayal walk through their doors. When my turn came, I stepped up to the young woman at the desk, her name tag reading Jessica. "I need to cancel a check," I said, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of months of humiliation. She tapped quickly at her keyboard. "Of course, sir. Can you provide the check number and the amount?" I slid the duplicate stub across the counter. "Check 2847, $50,000, made out to Harold Kensington." Her eyes flickered, reading the name as if she'd heard it before. "Sir, if the check has already been submitted for payment, this could create problems for the recipient." "That's exactly what I want," I replied, steady and deliberate. For a moment she studied me, not with judgment, but with the recognition of someone who had seen battles like this unfold before. Betrayed spouses, broken partnerships, family wars played out across bank ledgers. She nodded, once pulled out a stack of forms and handed me a pen. "There's a $35 processing fee. The stop payment will be effective immediately. Any attempt to deposit this check will be declined." I signed the papers with the same signature Harold had watched so carefully weeks earlier, only this time it wasn't a surrender. It was the beginning of a counterattack. When she slid the confirmation receipt toward me, I folded it neatly and tucked it into my wallet, placing it right beside Ava's old graduation photo. Walking out of that bank, the California sun felt brighter, sharper. I wasn't a helpless father anymore. I wasn't a man defined by rejection. I was a man holding the fuse to Harold's carefully staged wedding, and I had just lit it. By the time I left the bank, I knew exactly what was going to happen. Weddings run on money, as much as on love. Florists, caterers, photographers, musicians, all expecting their payments in full. Harold had boasted about handling every detail, every contract, every deposit. He had promised Ava a fairy tale. But without that $50,000, the foundation of his fantasy would collapse like a stage set, with its supports yanked away. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, the stop payment receipt folded neatly on the nightstand beside my glass of scotch. San Francisco glittered outside the window, couples strolling hand in hand, living ordinary lives untouched by schemes and heartbreak. Meanwhile, across the city, Harold was probably rehearsing his vows, oblivious to the financial wreckage waiting just hours ahead. The first message arrived at 7:15 p.m., while the string quartet would have been tuning their instruments. It was Harold's voice, smooth but slightly strained. "Mr. Rice, there seems to be a technical issue with the banking system. Could you call me back?" I listened twice, then set the phone down without replying. By 7:45, more messages came. His tone cracked, urgency bleeding through. "Sir, this is extremely urgent. We need to resolve this right away. Please contact the bank immediately." I poured myself another drink and let it ring. Each voicemail was like a drumbeat, the sound of Harold's mask slipping his carefully crafted world, unraveling piece by piece. Around 8:30, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Payment terminal acting up." Very strange. Probably a vendor. Then another buzz, this one from a guest I barely knew. Harold looks like he's seen a ghost. I could picture it clearly. The caterers holding out their invoices, insisting on settlement before serving dinner. Harold pulling out that black American Express card with a flourish, only to hear the brutal beep of denial. He'd try another card, then another, each one maxed out from previous cons. His confidence would drain under the fluorescent glare of reality. The music would falter, the photographer would quietly pack his gear, and the florists, practical as ever, would begin removing the centerpieces they had delivered only hours before. Ava would be standing there, confusion painted across her face, asking questions Harold couldn't answer without confessing the truth. Guests would whisper, phones discreetly raised to capture the unraveling of what was supposed to be her happiest night. The humiliation I had endured outside those doors would now belong to Harold, and the difference was simple: he had earned it. By 9 o'clock, my phone was flooded with missed calls. Harold's once practiced voice had turned frantic. "Please, Mr. Rice, there's been some mistake. The wedding is falling apart. We can't fix this without you." I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last of the scotch in my glass. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Harold had built his empire on lies and stolen money. Tonight I had quietly removed his last support, and now in front of everyone he had fooled, the truth was beginning to show. By the time the clock crept past 9:30, my phone had turned into a theater of desperation. The red notification badge blinked higher and higher, dozens of missed calls, voicemails piling up. Harold's confidence, once so polished, had dissolved into raw panic. I didn't need to be at the Fairmont Ballroom to imagine it. I had been in real estate long enough to know what happens when debts meet deadlines. The first voicemail still carried the traces of charm. "Mr. Rice, I assure you this is a misunderstanding. Just call the bank and we'll resolve it." But by message 15, that Polish was gone. "Sir, please, I need you to contact Chase immediately. The vendors are refusing to continue until payment clears. Ava is distraught." I closed my eyes and pictured the scene. The string quartet setting down their bows, explaining that their contracts required full payment before the second half of the evening. The photographer zipping up his bag, murmuring apologies, while guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Caterers halting the dinner service, holding trays of entrees hostage until funds arrived. Nothing kills celebration faster than the smell of money evaporating. By message 37, Harold's voice cracked. The background noise told the story better than his words ever could. Raised voices, the hollow echo of a grand ballroom dissolving into chaos. Guests murmuring, chairs scraping, someone shouting about contracts. I could hear Ava's voice, too, trembling, confused Harold. "What's happening? Why is everyone leaving?" Harold tried to spin it, even in desperation. "It's your father. He did this. He sabotaged us." His words dripped with the same venom he had always reserved for me, but now it was public. The facade of wealth, charm, and control had been stripped away. All that remained was a con man exposed in front of the very audience he sought to impress. The later voicemails blurred into a mix of pleading and threats. One moment Harold begged, "Please, Mr. Rice, I'll make this right. Just release the funds." The next he growled, "You'll regret this. Ava will never forgive you." His voice cracked with the weight of both arrogance and collapse. And then finally, message 68. Not Harold's voice this time. Ava's, broken, shaking. "Dad, please come back," he confessed. "Everything you said was true." The words pierced through me, sharper than any insult, heavier than any rejection. I had waited for this moment, had told myself it would feel like victory. But hearing my daughter sob on the other end, realizing her entire world had shattered in the space of a single evening, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like standing over wreckage, smoke still rising from the ruins. I pressed the phone to my chest, closing my eyes as her words replayed. Margaret had been right all along. Truth is more important than comfort. And now Ava finally saw the truth. Though it came at a cost I would never have wished upon her. The next call, the 74th, I finally answered. Her voice was barely a whisper. Dad, I need you. When I picked up that 74th call, I almost didn't recognize my daughter's voice. Gone was the confident, headstrong tone she'd used when she defended Harold against every warning I tried to give her. What came through the line instead was fragile trembling. Dad, she whispered, you were right about everything. I sat in the dim glow of the hotel lamp, gripping the phone with both hands, as if it were a lifeline. Tell me what he said, I asked quietly. Her words came in fragments punctuated by muffled sobs. About the money, about his debts, about the other women. He confessed when the vendors threatened to shut everything down. I didn't believe it at first, but then the credit cards, every one of them, declined. The florist started pulling out the flowers, Dad. The musicians left. People were whispering, filming. It was humiliating. I closed my eyes. I had pictured Harold's collapse in vivid detail, but hearing it from her voice made it real. Eva, listen to me. You are not the one who should feel humiliated. Harold built this house of lies, and it was bound to collapse. The only thing you did wrong was believing him. And that's not a crime. It's human. Through the receiver, I could hear Harold in the background, his voice high, desperate, trying to claw back control. Eva, don't listen to him. He's trying to poison you against me. I love you. We can fix this. Ava's tone hardened, something shifting inside her. No, Harold. You've lied to me since the beginning. You stole from my father, from other women, from everyone. I can't even tell what was real. There was a crash, maybe a chair overturned, and then Harold's voice again, pleading now, almost incoherent. Ava, don't leave me. Please, please, I need you. I waited until his voice faded, then spoke firmly. Sweetheart, I'll be on the first flight back to San Francisco. But understand this, I will not pay for anything. Not the caterers, not the venue, not Harold's debts. Do you hear me? Yes, Dad, she said quickly, desperate. I don't want his lies anymore. I need you. The ache in my chest eased, replaced by a quiet resolve. Then pack your things. Tomorrow we start fresh, you and me. No more secrets. When I hung up, the city outside was still alive with laughter and music. But in that moment, I felt something heavier than victory relief. Relief that my daughter's eyes had finally opened, that she had called me not in defiance, but in need. Margaret's words rang through my mind like a bell in a chapel. Truth is more important than comfort. And for the first time in months, I believed we might have both. I booked the red-eye flight with steady hands, slid the confirmation receipt from the bank back into my wallet, and whispered to the photograph on my nightstand. Margaret, she's coming back to us. The hours before my flight stretched out like an eternity. I sat by the hotel window, the city lights glittering like jewels scattered across black velvet, but none of it reached me. My thoughts were consumed by the sound of Ava's voice, broken and raw. I need you, Dad. Those words replayed over and over, soft as a plea and heavy as a verdict. I had imagined this moment so many times, what it would feel like when she finally saw Harold for who he really was. I thought it would taste like victory, sharp and sweet, but instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a battlefield surveying the wreckage left behind. Eva's trust had been shattered, her dignity stripped in front of family and friends, and I couldn't erase the part I played. After all, hadn't I signed that check? Hadn't I enabled Harold's charade in the first place? At JFK, I held Margaret's silver-framed photo in my lap while I waited to board. Her smile steadied me, a reminder of the values she had lived by. Honesty, patience, courage. "You fought to protect Ava," I whispered to her picture. "Even when it cost you her love. That has to count for something." On the red-eye flight, I rehearsed what I would say when I saw my daughter again. Apologies pressed at the tip of my tongue, tangled with the need to remind her that love sometimes demands hard choices. I knew she would be wounded, humiliated, grieving the man she thought Harold was. And I knew my role wasn't to say, "I told you so." My role was to steady her, to stand with her in the ruins, until she could stand on her own again. By dawn, the plane descended through the fog into San Francisco. The familiar skyline rose from the mist, and I felt the weight of both dread and resolve settle over me. I wasn't coming back as a man cast out of his daughter's wedding. I was coming back as her father, the one person who had seen the storm ahead and refused to surrender. Ava met me outside baggage claim, her face-pale eyes swollen from a night of tears. The emerald dress she had worn to dinner weeks before was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater clothes that made her look more like the little girl who once rode on my shoulders. The moment she saw me, her composure broke. She dropped her suitcase and fell into my arms, sobbing into my chest. "Dad, forgive me," she whispered. I held her close, my throat too tight for words. All the anger, the humiliation, the rejection, it melted in that moment. What remained was only love, bruised but unbroken. As we walked together toward the car, I realized the real revenge hadn't been the canceled check or Harold's public collapse. The real victory was here, my daughter, free from his lies, choosing to walk beside me again. Harold had tried to sever us, but in the end, he had only driven us back to each other. The morning after I returned to San Francisco with Ava, the headlines began to spread like wildfire. Blogs, wedding forums, even social media feeds. Everyone was talking about the wedding that imploded at the Fairmont. Guests had posted shaky cell phone footage of florists removing centerpieces mid-reception, of the string quartet packing their instruments, while bewildered friends whispered in the background. Some clips even captured Harold's face, red and glistening with sweat, as he tried to argue with vendors, waving unpaid contracts in his face. Ava scrolled through the videos with a kind of horrified fascination, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Everyone's laughing, Dad," she said softly, handing me her phone. "They're calling it the Kensington scam wedding." I put the phone aside and looked her in the eye. "Let them laugh at Harold. Not at you. You were his victim, Ava, not his accomplice." But Harold wasn't finished. By noon, his retaliation began. He called Ava non-stop, his messages alternating between groveling pleas and venomous attacks. "Sweetheart." It was just a banking glitch. One message said, his voice still trying to carry that old confidence. Minutes later, another came harsh and cold. "Your father is poisoning you. He's always been jealous of us. Don't let him destroy what we have." Eva's hands shook as she played them aloud. "He doesn't sound like the same man," she whispered. "That's because the mask is gone," I told her. Then came the threats. A voicemail I will never forget. "If you don't call me back, Ava, I'll make sure your father pays for this. He thinks he can humiliate me. He has no idea who he's dealing with." I replayed it twice, my jaw tightening. It was one thing for Harold to steal money to swindle trust, but to threaten me through my daughter, that was a line too far. He wasn't just lashing out at me. He was trying to regain control of her by painting me as the enemy once again. I knew better than to take Harold's words at face value, but I also knew men like him didn't go down quietly. Cornered con men are dangerous. They scramble, they threaten, they claw at anything that might give them leverage. And Harold had lost his golden ticket, Ava. "Dad, what do we do?" she asked, her voice small. "We document everything," I said firmly. "Every voicemail, every message, every email. He wants to fight, then we'll give the truth to people who can end this once and for all." That night, as Ava slept fitfully in the guest room, I sat at the dining table with Margaret's photograph propped beside me. I listened to Harold's messages again, not out of fear, but to remind myself of who he really was when stripped of charm. Not a businessman, not a fiancé, just a fraud unraveling at the seams. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning. Harold wasn't coming after me with charm anymore. He was coming with claws, and that meant he was scared. The next morning, Ava and I walked into the kitchen to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Dozens of notifications stacked one after another, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Harold's face flashed across the screen with each new attempt, the same polished smile from his profile picture, now warped into something grotesque by desperation. Eva stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down like it was a snake ready to strike. "Don't answer," I said quietly. She nodded, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. I poured her a cup of coffee, the bitter steam curling between us. For a moment, it felt like we were back in Brooklyn, a father and daughter starting the day together. Then her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification that made my stomach twist. An email. Subject line: exclusive statement from the Kensington family. I opened it carefully. Harold had sent it to dozens of people, relatives, family, friends, even some of my old business contacts. In it, he painted himself as the victim. He claimed he was targeted by false accusations from a jealous father who could not accept losing control of his daughter. He wrote about my supposed financial troubles, suggesting that I had sabotaged the wedding out of spite and poverty. And at the end, in bold letters, he declared Ava and I are stronger than ever. No one, not even her father, can come between us. Ava gasped when she read it. "He's lying. He's making you look like some bitter old man." I put the phone down slowly. This is what people like Harold do when they're cornered. They flip the story, make the victim look like the aggressor. But Ava lies don't hold forever. Still, his counterattack stung. My phone began buzzing too, messages from colleagues and old friends asking if I was all right, if the rumors were true. The humiliation I had endured on the wedding day threatened to spread even further this time into the wider world beyond the family. Harold's smear campaign was his way of clawing back dignity, but I knew it also revealed his fear. "Dad, what if people believe him?" Eva's voice cracked, her eyes wide with shame. "Then we show them the truth," I replied firmly. "We have the evidence. The court filings, the victims, the recordings of his threats. We don't fight him with words. We fight him with proof." Later that afternoon, Harold's threats escalated. Another voicemail landed, his voice sharp with rage. "Mr. Rice, I know what you did with that check. If you think you can humiliate me, you're mistaken. I'll ruin you. I'll take everything you have left." I saved the message, labeling it with the date and time. Each word was another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. That night, Ava sat beside me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, silent tears streaking her cheeks. I held her close, not as a man celebrating victory, but as a father bracing for the next storm. Because Harold hadn't disappeared, he was still out there, thrashing, desperate. And a desperate man is most dangerous when he realizes he has nothing left to lose. 2 days after Harold's exclusive statement, the phone calls shifted from friends and family to strangers. Journalists, local reporters, even a podcaster who covered financial scandals. They all wanted to know if I had a comment about the father who sabotaged his daughter's wedding. Harold had taken his smear campaign wider, feeding the story to anyone willing to run it. I declined every interview, but the damage was done. One tabloid headline read, "Wealthy father cancels check, leaves groom humiliated." Another went further, "Did Giles Rice break his daughter's heart for revenge?" My name was splashed across headlines alongside Harold's, as though we were equals in some sordid duel. Eva sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through the articles, her face pale. "Dad, they're making it sound like you hated me enough to ruin everything." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how he does it. He twists everything." I took the phone gently from her hands. "That's what con men do, sweetheart. They lie loudly, hoping the truth gets drowned out." But Harold wasn't just playing to the media. That evening, Ava received a letter slipped under her apartment door. No postage, no signature, just a sheet of paper with typed words that made my blood run cold. "If you side with him, you'll regret it. Don't forget I know where your accounts are." Eva's hands shook as she held the paper. "Dad, he's threatening me now." I folded the letter carefully, sliding it into a manila folder. This goes with the others. Every voicemail, every email, every lie, it all becomes evidence. He thinks threats will scare us into silence, but he's only building the case against himself. Still, I couldn't ignore the chill creeping through me. Harold had crossed from manipulation into intimidation. And intimidation, especially tied to money, was a crime the FBI cared about. That night, I reached out to Rebecca Martinez, the woman whose name had first appeared in the Los Angeles court documents. She answered after 3 rings, her voice wary but strong. "I've been waiting for someone else to come forward," she said, after I explained who I was. "Harold ruined me, Mr. Rice. Took my money, my trust, 2 years of my life, fighting a case that drained me more than the theft itself. If your daughter is ready to speak, we'll stand together." I hung up with a sense of grim solidarity. Harold's past victims weren't just shadows in court filings anymore. They were real women, and they were ready to fight. Eva listened quietly as I told her about Rebecca. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders seemed to straighten. "So I'm not alone." "No," I said firmly. "You never were. He just made you think you were." Through the window, San Francisco glowed with the restless energy of a city that never fully sleeps. But for once, I didn't feel like a man on the outside looking in. I felt like a father preparing for the final act, not a plea for reconciliation, but a war built on truth. Harold had taken his counterattack public. Soon, so would we. The following week felt like living inside a storm. Each day brought new evidence of Harold's desperation. His emails grew longer, more erratic, swinging wildly between professions of love for Ava and bitter accusations against me. "Sweetheart, your father has always been jealous of us. He'll do anything to tear us apart." Then hours later, another message, "Giles, you old fool, you think canceling a check makes you clever. I'll bury you." Eva stopped opening them. She'd forward each one to me, her face drained of emotion, as though she couldn't bear to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But I read them all, every word, saving them into folders like ammunition. Each rant, each threat, each contradictory plea was another crack in his armor. One night around midnight, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Mr. Rice, Harold's voice hissed, stripped of its polished veneer. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you think anyone will believe your lies once I'm done with you? I've got people in my corner, lawyers, investors, friends in places you can't touch." I let the silence hang for a beat before replying. "Harold, the louder you scream, the clearer the truth becomes. Every word you're saying right now is being recorded. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate, it's all evidence. For the first time, I heard him falter. A pause, then a sneer. You think your daughter will still love you after this? You've destroyed her wedding, her reputation. She'll hate you until the day you die. No, I said, voice steady. She'll understand that I saved her from you, and one day she'll thank me for it. The line went dead, but the recording remained. I saved the file, labeling it carefully. It wasn't just a conversation, it was the sound of Harold unraveling. The next morning, Ava came to the kitchen with her laptop. Her eyes were red, but her chin was set with determination. Dad, she said, I've been thinking. Maybe we should take this to the FBI. You said you had court documents, right? And now with these threats. She hesitated, then added softly, I don't want to hide anymore. Hearing those words from her was like feeling the first break in the clouds after weeks of rain. For months, Harold had manipulated her, isolating her from me, convincing her that his world was the only one she needed. Now she was choosing to stand in the light. We spent that day compiling everything: court filings, victim testimonies, screenshots, recordings. Even the letter slipped under her door. By evening, the stack of folders filled half the dining table. Margaret's photograph watched from the mantel, her smile approving, as though she had been guiding us here all along. Tomorrow, I told Ava, placing a steady hand on hers, we walk into the FBI office together, and we tell them everything. She nodded, tears brimming again, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from resolve. Harold had wanted to break us apart. Instead, he had forged us into allies, and he had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, Ava and I walked side by side into the federal building on Golden Gate Avenue. The air inside was cool, sterile, and unforgiving, the kind of place where lies didn't last long under fluorescent lights. We carried 2 leather satchels stuffed with evidence folders, recordings, printed emails, even that anonymous letter Harold had slid under her door. The receptionist looked up as we approached. Can I help you? Yes, I said firmly. We need to speak to someone in the white-collar crime division. It's urgent. Minutes later, we were led into a small interview room. A young agent introduced himself as Special Agent Ramirez. He listened quietly as we spread the evidence across the table like a map of Harold's deceit. Court filings from Los Angeles. Victim testimonies from women Harold had drained of their savings. Emails where his words contradicted themselves. Voicemails full of threats, each one more frantic than the last. Eva's voice shook as she explained her part. I didn't see it, Agent Ramirez. I thought he loved me. But he was controlling everything: my accounts, my wedding, even who I could talk to. When my dad canceled that check, Harold finally showed me who he really was. Ramirez nodded, his eyes scanning documents with the trained detachment of a man used to seeing the worst of human greed. This lines up with other reports we've been investigating. Kensington, if that's even his real name, has been on our radar for months. Your evidence could be what ties everything together. Eva let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, a voice in a larger story. When the meeting ended, Ramirez collected the evidence, assuring us they would move quickly. As Ava and I walked back out into the sunlight, I felt her hand slip into mine. It was the same small gesture she had made as a little girl when she was scared of crossing the street. Only this time, it wasn't fear that drove her, it was strength. That evening, Harold tried one last time. My phone buzzed with his number, and against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was ragged, almost unrecognizable. Mr. Rice, you've destroyed me. Do you hear me? You and your daughter, you've ruined everything. No, Harold, I said evenly. You did that yourself. We just stopped pretending. There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. You think the FBI can touch me? I've been ahead of them for years. Not anymore, I replied, then hung up. I saved the call just like all the others. Another nail, another weight pulling Harold deeper into the pit he'd dug for himself. That night, Ava and I sat together in the quiet, the weight of months lifting from our shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare began, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me." And in that moment, I realized the counterattack was over. The tide had turned. Harold's lies had carried him far, but now the law would carry him the rest of the way, straight into the reckoning he had earned. 3 weeks later, summer heat shimmered across San Francisco's streets when the call finally came. It was Special Agent Ramirez. His voice was calm but carried a current of satisfaction. "Mr. Rice, Ms. Rice, we've arrested Harold Kensington this morning. Charges include wire fraud, identity theft, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy. He's in federal custody." Eva's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening as the words sank in. For months, she had been trapped in his web, blinded by love and promises. Now that web had snapped. She whispered almost to herself, "He can't hurt anyone else." Ramirez explained how Harold's accounts had been frozen. His aliases tracked his network of shell companies dismantled. "Your evidence provided the roadmap," he said. "We connected it with financial trails from 3 other states. Without your files, it might have taken us years." After the call ended, Eva sat at the kitchen table, staring at her folded hands. "Dad, I feel empty," she admitted. "Like I should be happy, but instead I just feel hollow." I pulled out Margaret's photograph from the mantel and set it between us. "Your mother always said truth doesn't come easy. It cuts deep, but it cleans the wound." Eva's eyes brimmed with tears. "I miss her. She would have seen through him right away." "She did," I said softly. "Through me." Every instinct I had was her voice echoing in my head. I just didn't trust it soon enough. The following day, news outlets across the country ran the story, "Crypto Investor Arrested in Multi-State Fraud Scheme." The mugshot of Harold, stripped of his polish, stared out from every screen, his hair unkempt, his smile gone. Articles listed his crimes, the millions he had stolen, the trail of broken promises. For once, the headlines didn't frame me as the villain. They named Harold for what he was, a con man. Eva read them in silence, then finally spoke. "I thought I loved him, but I loved an illusion, and in the process I almost lost you." I reached across the table, gripping her hand. "You never lost me, Ava. I was always here. I just had to let the truth do the talking." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Golden Gate, we sat together on the balcony, the city lights flickering awake. Ava leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice steady for the first time in months. "Dad, I want to testify. I want to stand in that courtroom and tell them what he did. Not just to me, but to all the women before me." Pride swelled in my chest. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted justice. Margaret's smile in the photograph seemed to glow in the fading light, as if she approved of the woman our daughter had become. Harold had tried to isolate her, to make her doubt her own worth. But now she was choosing her voice. And that, I knew, would be his final undoing. The federal courthouse in San Francisco was a building of glass and steel, imposing not because of its design, but because of what it represented: accountability. Eva and I walked through the heavy doors together, her steps measured but steady. She wore no extravagant dress this time, no jewelry Harold had once draped over her as proof of his wealth. Instead, she dressed simply black slacks, a cream blouse, her face pale but resolute. She wasn't here to dazzle. She was here to testify. Inside, the waiting area buzzed with muted conversation. Agents moved with clipped precision. Lawyers shuffled papers, and victims like Rebecca Martinez and Sarah Chen sat together, their faces tense but united. When they saw Ava, they rose to greet her. Rebecca embraced her tightly. "You're brave for being here," she whispered. Ava nodded, her eyes glistening, but she didn't waver. When our turn came, we were led into a room where a federal prosecutor sat at the head of a long oak table. Special Agent Ramirez was there too, his calm presence steadying Ava. The prosecutor asked Ava to recount everything: how Harold charmed her, how he controlled the wedding, how he begged me for money in secret. Her voice trembled at first, but as the questions went on, something shifted. She sat taller, her words clearer, her tone sharpened with conviction. He lied about everything she said firmly: his businesses, his finances, his past. He asked my father for $50,000, pretending his assets were frozen. And when my father confronted him, Harold convinced me to believe it was all jealousy. I turned my back on the man who raised me, who protected me, because Harold knew how to twist the truth. She paused, tears threatening, then finished with quiet strength. But I see now. My father was right all along. I watched her pride swelling in my chest. Margaret would have been proud too, our daughter finding her voice in the very place Harold hoped to silence it. Later, Ramirez played the recordings. I had saved Harold's rants, his threats, his desperate calls the night of the wedding. Each message was a dagger cutting through the polished facade Harold had tried so hard to maintain. When his angry declaration echoed across the speakers: "I'll ruin you, Giles. I'll take everything you have left." Even the prosecutor raised his brows. "This is more than fraud," Ramirez said quietly. "It's intimidation. It shows his pattern of coercion." Eva reached for my hand under the table. Her grip was firm, steady. When the session ended, the prosecutor gathered the files into a neat stack. "We have enough to indict him on multiple counts. Between the financial records, the victim testimonies, and these recordings, Harold Kensington's days of running are over." Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. For the first time in months, Eva's shoulders seemed lighter. "It feels like breathing again," she whispered. I nodded, slipping the confirmation receipt from my wallet, the one that proved I had canceled Harold's check. It had started as an act of revenge. Now it was evidence of justice. Harold had taken nearly everything from us, but in trying to destroy me, he had forged something stronger: a daughter who refused to be silenced, and a father who refused to give up. The first day of Harold's hearing drew a crowd. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims, and curious onlookers. His name had become infamous after the collapse of the wedding, and now the public wanted to see the man who had turned deception into a profession. Ava sat beside me in the gallery, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the front of the room. Then they brought him in. For the first time, Harold Kensington didn't look like a prince from a magazine cover. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a prison jumpsuit. His hair was unkempt, his jawline shadowed with stubble, and the confident gleam in his eyes had dulled into something darker, defiance tinged with fear. Yet even shackled, he tried to wear that smirk, the one that once charmed my daughter into blindness. When the prosecutor laid out the charges: wire fraud, identity theft, misappropriation of funds, Harold kept his eyes forward, his expression fixed. But when they began listing the names of the victims one by one, I saw his mask crack. Rebecca Martinez, Sarah Chen, Jennifer Walsh, and then Ava Rice. My daughter's name, spoken aloud in that chamber, carried more weight than any legal jargon. Eva's hands trembled, and I placed mine over hers. She didn't look at me, but she squeezed back, grounding herself. The prosecutor presented the recordings next. Harold's voice filled the room, smooth at first, then desperate, then venomous. "Mr. Rice, you've humiliated me. I'll ruin you. Your daughter will hate you until the day you die." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Harold shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, his eyes flicking toward Ava for the briefest moment. That look told me everything. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't remorseful. He was angry that he had lost control. When Ava was called to testify, the courtroom stilled. She walked to the stand with slow, deliberate steps, her shoulders squared, though I could see the fear trembling beneath. She swore the oath, then took her seat, facing the man who had nearly destroyed her life. The prosecutor guided her gently through her testimony. She spoke about how they met, how quickly Harold swept her into his world, how he had taken over every detail of the wedding. Her voice faltered when she recounted the moment she banned me from the ceremony. She glanced at me, then her eyes brimming. I thought my father was the enemy, but he was the only one who saw the truth. Harold's attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she had acted out of bitterness once the wedding fell apart. But Ava held her ground. "No," she said firmly, her voice echoing. "I'm here because Harold Kensington is a liar and a thief. He didn't just steal money, he stole trust. And I won't let him do it to anyone else." I sat in that courtroom, my heart pounding with pride. My daughter, once blinded by his charm, now stood as one of his strongest accusers. Harold had taken everything he could, but he had failed to take her voice. And in that room, her voice was more powerful than all of his lies combined. The second day of the hearing was worse for Harold than the first. By then, the courtroom had grown crowded with cameras, journalists, and even a few curious strangers who had read about the so-called scam wedding. The prosecution rolled out document after document, bank records, wire transfers, forged contracts. Each one stripped away another layer of Harold's carefully constructed image. He sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, flipping through papers. His attorney slid toward him. Gone was the confident man who once boasted about market portfolios and ambitious ventures. What remained was a cornered predator, his tricks exposed under the fluorescent light of justice. When the prosecutor introduced the testimony of other victims, the room shifted. Rebecca Martinez described how Harold had promised to invest her life savings into a secure blockchain startup. Sarah Chen told of late-night phone calls where Harold swore he loved her, swore they were building a future together before draining her accounts dry. Jennifer Walsh explained how she wore an identical engagement ring, same cut, same band, as the one Harold had given Ava. Gasps rippled through the gallery as photographs of those rings appeared on the projector side by side. Ava sat stiffly beside me, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I reached over and gripped her hand. "You're not alone," I whispered. She nodded, never looking away from Harold. The defense tried to argue that Harold was a victim of market volatility and that his relationships had been misunderstood. But each attempt fell flat under the weight of evidence. When the prosecutor played the recording of Harold's voice screaming, "I'll ruin you, Giles. I'll take everything you have left," the last remnants of his facade crumbled. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his expression tightening. Harold shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the exit doors, as though he could still escape. But there was no exit this time. Every escape hatch he had relied on, money charm manipulation, had been sealed shut. During a recess, Ava and I stepped into the hallway. Reporters swarmed, questions flying. "Mr. Rice, did you cancel the check to expose Harold?" "Ms. Rice, how does it feel to testify against the man you once loved?" Ava lifted her chin, her voice clear and steady. "It feels necessary. Harold didn't just betray me, he betrayed every person who trusted him. I won't let him do it again." The cameras flashed, capturing not just her words, but her strength. For months she had been Harold's puppet, her strings pulled by his lies. Now she was cutting those strings in public, and the world was watching. When court resumed, the prosecutor delivered a closing line that hung in the air like a hammer blow. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold Kensington did not stumble into fraud. He designed it, he perfected it, and he executed it on women who trusted him most. This wasn't business. This was predation. I glanced at Harold one last time. His smirk was gone, his shoulders slumped, his face pale under the harsh lights. For the first time I saw him as he truly was, not a wealthy investor, not a charming fiancé, but a desperate man watching his empire of lies collapse around him. The final day of the trial began with an unusual stillness. The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers and curiosity, now carried a sense of inevitability. The jury filed back into their seats, faces, grave eyes cast down at the papers before them. Harold sat at the defense table, his once perfect posture gone, shoulders slouched, like a man carrying weights he could no longer bear. When the foreperson rose, time seemed to stop. We, the jury, find the defendant, Harold James Kensington, guilty on all counts: wire fraud, identity theft, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to defraud. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by a silence so heavy I could hear Eva's breath catch beside me. Harold closed his eyes, his jaw twitching, but he didn't speak. The judge's gavel fell once, sharp as thunder. Sentencing would come later, but the verdict was final. Harold's empire of lies was over. Eva gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, but I welcomed the pain. It meant she was still here, still mine. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks as the prosecutor thanked her for her courage. She nodded, unable to speak, but her eyes said everything: relief, sorrow, and a flicker of pride. Outside, the courthouse steps erupted with cameras and microphones. Reporters clamored for statements. Rebecca Martinez and Sarah Chen spoke first, their voices steady, as they described how justice at last had caught up with Harold. Then came Eva. She stood tall, her voice trembling but strong. I was blinded by charm. I thought Harold was my future, but he was a predator who fed on trust. He didn't just take money, he took years, dignity, and peace of mind from every woman he deceived. But today proves that the truth has a way of winning even when lies seem stronger. My father never stopped fighting for me even when I turned against him, and I thank him for that. Her words echoed down the marble steps, carried by the cameras, recorded for the world to see. I stood behind her, silent, not seeking attention. This was her moment to reclaim what Harold had tried to steal: her voice, her strength, her dignity. That night, back at my apartment in Brooklyn, the two of us sat quietly at the kitchen table. The folders that had once been weapons against Harold now sat stacked neatly in a box, ready to be archived as evidence. Margaret's photograph looked down on us from the mantel, her smile frozen in timeless approval. Eva sipped her tea, her eyes reflecting the city lights outside. Dad, I don't know how to make up for what I said to you, banning you from my wedding, believing his lies. I shook my head. There's nothing to make up for. You were deceived, Eva. What matters is you found your way back. She reached across the table, her fingers wrapping around mine. You saved me. You didn't give up even when I pushed you away. I looked at her, my chest tight with both love and sorrow. That's what fathers do. We hold on even when it hurts. Outside, Brooklyn hummed with its familiar rhythm, ordinary lives going on. For once, I no longer envied them. Justice had been served, and more importantly, my daughter was back where she belonged, beside me, free of Harold's chains. Looking back now, I realize Harold never truly stole from me. Yes, he took money, dignity, and months of peace, But what he tried hardest, to steal my bond with my daughter, he ultimately failed to keep. In fact, his betrayal became the fire that reforged us stronger than before. I share this story not for revenge, but for those of you who may know what it feels like to be dismissed, humiliated, or betrayed by someone you love. Sometimes protecting the people closest to us means making choices they won't understand at first. It means carrying the pain of their anger, even their rejection, because you know the truth will surface in time. Harold's conviction reminded me of something Margaret always said: lies can shine for a moment, but truth endures. That truth gave Ava her voice back. And it reminded me that being a father isn't about being liked. It's about being steadfast, even when it hurts. If you are a parent listening to this, ask yourself, are you protecting your children with comfort or with truth? Sometimes love demands both patience and steel. Now I want to ask you, have you ever lived through something like this? A betrayal, a painful truth, a moment when you had to choose between silence and courage? Share your story in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, truth will always outlast lies. Thank you for listening.